The Paradox Pokemon being added in Scarlet and Violet was easily one of the most influential pieces that was added to VGC. You really can't escape their presence in competitive, partially because we have 20 options to choose from, but even with just a lot of Pokemon, that doesn't necessarily make them good. Their high base stat totals though, as well as their incredibly optimized spreads, are what truly make these Pokemon all nightmares in VGC. Today I want to give a bit of a spotlight to the Paradox Pokemon, and truly rank all 20 Paradox Pokemon in competitive, so you guys can learn what options you should be using in Regulation F for your next team. Obviously, since this is going over current Regulation F meta, we're not doing Koraidon Miraidon. With all that said though, we have plenty of Pokemon to rank today, so let's not hesitate with this intro. Let's get started with our bottom of the rank Pokemon. Just like with our fire type video, I want to clear through some really lackluster entries very early on. For this first category Pokemon, being the Pokemon with absolutely zero redeeming qualities, I think this really only actually includes 2 Paradox Pokemon. Most of the others, I think you could really stretch the definition of usable and find some reason to use them, but these 2, in my opinion, are just so bad, and you're genuinely doing a disservice to your team running them outside of for content. With our number 20 entry, we're gonna go over Iron Thorns, and number 19, we're gonna go over Iron Leaves. Really, these 2 are pretty even, but I gave the slight edge to Iron Leaves purely due to its speed. But neither of these Pokemon are really good series options, and they both share a lot of the same issues. For one, they both have really bad defensive typings, which especially in Iron Thorn's case, being such a bulky Pokemon, this is a huge issue, and it has a 4 times weakness to one of the most prolific moves in the game, being Ground, specifically with options like Earthquake still being very common, as well as Stomping Tantrum, and just ground types being really good in the format. Iron Leaves isn't much better though, with common weaknesses to types like Ghost, Dark, Fire, Ice, and so many others. It's really hard to actually make this Pokemon work without forcing a Terra. Not only this, but even with the best Terras benefiting both these Pokemon, they're not really that good Terra abusers anyway. You're not going to get the same merit you would get out of something like a Terra Normal Dragonite, or really just any other top tier Terra performer, with Iron Thorns typically benefiting the most from Terra Bug due to the fact that it can boost Pin Missile with loaded dice, as well as get you a ground resistance and a Psychic resistance that does benefit a lot with your pre-Terra typing. Meanwhile, Iron Leaves is in a little bit better of a situation, since Terra Fighting actually does have some nice synergy with its Dual Stab combination, but I'd be lying if I said this is still a good defensive type to have, as it's weak to a lot of common Pokemon such as Fluttermane and really any good flying type in the format, especially with Tornadus being one of the best Pokemon of all time right now. I can't really imagine either Pokemon being ran on a serious team, and despite the fact that they can technically fill very specific roles in this format, I would be lying if I said I could personally advocate for either Pokemon to be used in Regulation F. For our second category of Pokemon though, let's get into the Paradox Pokemon that do actually have some competitive merit. While all the Pokemon ranked in our 18th through 11th slot do have some niche and competitive, I still probably wouldn't be running these if I was anticipating to win a tournament, but they do definitely have enough strengths going for them that at the very least you could get a positive result, even if there is an objectively better option. We'll start off with our 18th and 17th Pokemon though, as these are the easiest to clear through right away, being Slitherwing and Iron Moth respectively. Now Slitherwing actually did potentially see some usage in Regulation E in a little bit of a niche situation, as a really good Terra Fire option, as it can offensively revenge Pokemon like Urshifu Single, and it's also just a really good offensive typing to have on a team. Bug Fighting and Terra Fire does actually give you a lot of good matchups. Into Pokemon like Amoonguss for example, it can potentially cause some good 50-50s into the Ogerpon forms, especially Hearthflame, and with First Impressions actually did match up during Regulation E at least into a lot of top tiers that were very weak to Bug for some reason. Terra Fire also changes your weakness to Fluttermane into a good resistance, and Fluttermane still does take a lot of damage from Protosynthesis Flare Blitz, making this a really niche option that could technically see results. Though I don't believe Slitherwing actually did, despite the fact that it did theoretically have some reasons to be used in Regulation E. Regulation F is a little bit less kind to it, but it still could technically find success, as I think realistically it's in a unique enough situation where very few Pokemon that do have the things that it has, such as a physical boosting fire option with Terra Fire Flare Blitz, as well as the fact that you have First Impression as a good priority option, which a lot of other Pokemon that could run it are just worse than Slitherwing. I think it's a unique enough kit to where you could get some merit out of it, but a lot of Sun teams would just prefer a lot of other fire types in the format, such as Hisui and Arcanine, Entei, and really any other physical fire. I think Iron Moth though, one of its biggest factors isn't even the fact that Fluttermane is used though, it's the fact that Fluttermane just benefits from being used next to Chiyu, a fire type that benefits Fluttermane's success even further. It has a better defensive synergy with Fluttermane, it doesn't require booster to be viable, which means that booster speed and special attack flutters can still be used on those sort of teams, and overall I think it just is a worse Pokemon than both of these. Similarly, our 16th entry, Iron Shreds, has a lot of these same issues competing with top tier ground types like Landorus Therian and even Garchomp on some very niche teams for physical grounds. Meanwhile, a lot of the ground types that are the best right now are just special attackers anyway, and you could really start to see why Iron Shreds isn't used. However, with Clear Amulet and potential electric train support, you could technically make this work. I actually did the other day on the channel for my main channel, LivSama, which I'll put an annotation to here. But overall, it's a very, very niche Pokemon that while you could technically get success out of it, it's really just jumping through hoops to make it work. For entries 15 and 14 though, we have two other Paradox Pokemon that I think actually could kind of see some roles that are very, very strong in VGC, but these two are probably the most outclassed out of anything in the list today, being Iron Valiant and Brute Bonnet. Iron Valiant is essentially just a mixed version of Fluttermane, with also really good support moves that a lot of other really fast Pokemon would provide. This thing gets probably one of the widest support move pools in the game, with options like Encore and Disable, Wide Guard and Quick Guard, Coaching, Destiny Bond, to one of the fastest non-prankster taunts. You have Icy Wind and Knockoff. Like, it's really hard to rival Iron Valiant's support kit. Also with strong attacks like Moonblast, Spirit Break, Close Combat, and Dazzling Gleam as well for a nice spread option with Terra Fairy, and so many other coverage moves. This thing is truly one of the most well-crafted Pokemon for offense. But with Fluttermane existing and just being a faster option that also can pressure this, why would you use Iron Valiant as your offensive fairy when it would always have to look at Fluttermane in the matchup and just wish it was being ran as a Fluttermane instead of an Iron Valiant? I think genuinely speaking, if Fluttermane didn't exist, Iron Valiant would have a case at least as a top 5 Paradox Pokemon, if not just a top Pokemon in the entire format. But Fluttermane's existence genuinely does just invalidate Iron Valiant. Brute Bonnet has a similar issue with the Moongus, though it's definitely not as egregious, which is why it's going to rank one slot higher than Iron Valiant, since a lot of Sun teams do actually consider Brute Bonnet due to the fact that it can be a lot more of an offensive Pokemon. However, at the same time, there are still Sun teams that would just prefer a Moongus due to the fact that it has a lot better longevity, a defensive typing that can actually resist Fluttermane, which is one of the best ways to revenge Sun because it also benefits from the Sun, and overall, if you can't keep your weather, a Moongus is always going to be the better option in that case. And there's a lot of other dark types that can do what Bonnet does without having to be as reliant on weather. Finally, for our 13th through 11th entries, these are Pokemon that used to be really strong options, and unfortunately all three just got power crept. But I could actually see all three of these Pokemon still being used at high level play, as despite the fact that they are power crept, they have unique enough reasons to use them over current meta picks. For our 13th entry, we have Sandy Shocks, which while you could just use Landorus Incarnate, there is a big reason to use Sandy Shocks, being the fact that it has Electro Web now, giving you a nice booster speed or special attack option that can slow down opponents, while also going for an option like Terra Ice to get Bolt Beam coverage with Earth Power. While Landorus Incarnate definitely would objectively be better on rain teams, there are certain teams that might be throwing a Landorus Incarnate on willy-nilly that I think might technically benefit from Shocks, though I feel like it's going to be a lot more niche for sure, because Sandy Shocks still has a lot of issues, such as the fact that it's a much worse defensive typing, and also the fact that Landorus Incarnate again just has a really spammable ground spread move and can wall break a lot better without relying on Booster or Sun. For our number 12 option, meanwhile, we have Iron Jugulis, which you could essentially see as the special equivalent of Roaring Moon, though I think unlike Iron Valiant, it's not as aggressively power crept by it. With Iron Jugulis in particular, you get a lot stronger snarls off, as well as the fact that your Flying Stab isn't reliant on just going for Terra here, making it a still fairly noteworthy option. Also, this in general has a much better defensive typing than Roaring Moon into most Pokemon other than Ogre Bond forms, and I definitely think that there are certain teams that might just benefit from Jugulis altogether, especially when you can also factor in that Iron Jugulis is a lot easier of a time running a more defensive Terra like Poison that would benefit it in a lot more of a wide array of scenarios, since it isn't reliant on Terra Flying Acrobatics to deal damage. For our final Pokemon in this Outclassed category, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Great Tusk, which used to be the king of ground types in VGC and now has considerably fallen off due to the fact that we have better fighting types like Urshifu right now, as well as the fact that we have better ground types like Landorus forms, really either one or either Ursaluna form. It is definitely difficult to find this Pokemon among top contenders, but Great Tusk is still such a strong Pokemon overall that I wouldn't really be surprised to see it doing well in future tournaments. Now that we've breezed through our top 10, let's get into our more serious picks. Anything from here I would actually expect to make a day 2 at some point in Regulation F, and starting off with our top 10, we have one of our newest Paradox Pokemon being Iron Boulder. Now I'm going to be honest, I'm still very unsure where to rank this overall, but I did at least figure that I had to acknowledge this is a good Pokemon now. I had my doubts early on, but Mighty Cleave breaking through Protect, as well as it being a 100% accurate Rock type move, is nothing to scoff at. And I think overall this will benefit a lot from options like Booster Speed or Clear Amulet sets to get around Intimidate, and with Terra typings like Rock to lean into Mighty Cleave damage, or Terra Ghost to get around Fake Out, and even Terra Fighting to just get a nice defensive benefit against a lot of the common Dark types right now, and you start to see why this Pokemon could in theory be used really well. I think if you partnered it with a good redirector like Ogerpon or Amoonguss, this would go absolutely wild in VGC. But for now though, I think it's right now just going to continue to be a little bit of an underexplored Pokemon that will have some niche results, but it's not going to be meta defining by any means. Going into number 9, we have probably the most unique Paradox Pokemon in the entire list, being none other than Screamtail. Now this is a Pokemon I think is both incredibly slept on still, as well as incredibly overhyped at the same time. I think it really just depends on who you ask, because Screamtail will both do so much support for a team and none at the same time, with options like Howl, Encore, and Disable all being very prolific options on Screamtail, and with Booster Speed you can make sure that you're going for these moves faster than most other Pokemon. Being able to lock an opponent into an option like Detect or Protect, and then making sure that you can also just disable coverage options that would kill your team, this does prove to be a very annoying option for most players, and if it wasn't for the fact that Screamtail has a very hard time dealing damage, it would probably be a very meta-relevant Pokemon. But we do have better Encore options later on that can still deal really serious damage for teams, and that's why it does rank so low, unfortunately, on today's list. Though certain teams that might benefit a lot more of a bulkier support would still like to use Screamtail in my opinion. At number 8 today, we're going to be ranking Walking Wake, which is a very strong Sunbreaker, but I think unfortunately it's just a little bit clunky right now. While Walking Wake does have an incredible move with Hydro Steam, making it not only the only water type move to be completely unaffected by Sun, but it also benefits from Sun getting a 1.5 times damage boost. This proves to be a very strong and very unique option for Sun teams that can still take advantage of photosynthesis. Not only this, but it's also one of the only Sun Pokemon that would be completely unfazed by an opposing Rain team, since you can just not worry about Rain since your Hydro Steam will still deal incredible damage, gaining yet another 1.5 times boost. With Hydro Steam, Draco Meteor, Flamethrower, and Protect, it's really hard to actually just not claim a kill with Walking Wake in general. However, at the same time, the booster speed sets are still slower than Flutter Mane without a viable spread move, and meanwhile the booster special attack sets do have to compete with a few other Paradox Pokemon on today's list, and I really can't see where Walking Wake just is objectively the best at any of these categories, and instead I think it's just a really good option that can be a nice second or third special attacker on a team for Sun teams. Despite having fallen off a bit, we do have arguably the best support Pokemon for any sort of Paradox, being our number 7th option, Iron Bundle. Now Iron Bundle is great because it can outpace literally everything besides like a Scarf, Regieleki, or Dragapult. And with a booster speed set, you can go for things like Icy Wind, allowing you to speed control against most common threats. You also have Encore to lock opponents into really unfavorable moves faster than they can ever do anything about. And then you have Hydro Pump and Freeze Dry, which is a pretty damning offensive stab combination to switch around, being nearly impossible to check. Also, if you were to run this on a snow team, you even have more niche options like Aurora Veil, allowing this a very fast way to get up a dual screen, and Iron Bundle proves to really still be a fairly good Pokemon in my opinion. Typically, you're going to see this with Terra Ghost, as it's a great way around common Fake Out users that would otherwise try and disrupt you, allowing Iron Bundle essentially the best case scenario going into any sort of matchup in my opinion. As pre-Terra, you have a great typing that does benefit you with a strong dual stab combination, and post-Terra, you can get around one of the easiest ways to disrupt a fast Pokemon, being Fake Out. And overall, Iron Bundle will still be a really good Pokemon, and I think going forward, it's going to be the gold standard of an offensive support piece in my opinion, but for now, it's just going to rank at number 7 because there unfortunately are 6 better Paradox Pokemon than it going forward. In my opinion, our number 6 option is the best offensive Tailwinder of all time, being none other than Roaring Moon, which is still a fairly prolific option in VGC. This essentially is the non-prankster counterpart to Tornadus, allowing you a nice defensive typing with options to check Pokemon like Ogerpons and Rillaboom, while still having the bulk to completely keep up with most offensive Pokemon. With your pre-Terra typing of Dark, you can get around a lot of prankster Pokemon that would otherwise maybe go for an option like Taunt into you, or even Thunder Wave to slow you down, and with 2 very strong booster options, whether it's Booster Speed to get up a faster Tailwind, or just to revenge teams really quickly, and with Booster Attack, they can lean into moves like Knockoff and Acrobatics for a very strong offensive combination, and it's very hard to actually consistently check Roaring Moon by just looking at its team-on-team preview. You can still go for a lot of the more supportive moves that a Pokemon like Juggius would go for with options like Snarl, and you even have another additional move with Breaking Swipe, which you get another stab boost on anyway. And it's pretty easy to see why Roaring Moon is a very top contender in the current format, as it's one of the fastest Pokemon in the tier, and it proves to just be a very annoying and versatile pick, despite it having a 4 times weakness to the best Pokemon in the format. Finally, we're at the top 5, and starting off, I have a Pokemon that I'm actually very conflicted on ranking here. Despite the fact that I think objectively this is the best place for it, it's very disheartening because I used to think this was the best Paradox Pokemon, but coming in at number 5, we have Iron Hands, which got significantly nerfed in Regulation F due to the rise in Psychic Terrain teams as well as the introduction of Psychic Noise, meaning that Pokemon like Fergraph turned into a very hard counter for Iron Hands. It still proves to be a very strong Pokemon, however, with options like Clear Amulet now rising to combat a lot of Intimidators like Incineroar, and this proves to be a very good Trick Room Sweeper in my opinion, with options like Heavy Slam, Wild Charge, Drain Punch, or Close Combat, and then Fake Out as your 4th move. This can still definitely get a really good position here, and I do expect Iron Hands to still continue to be a top contender, but it went from being the most used Pokemon in certain times in VGC to now barely getting above like 5 to 10% usage. And it's really sad because Iron Hands is still a really well-designed Pokemon in my opinion, and I would love to see it pop up again in usage later on. Now that we've went over Iron Hands, let's get into the Iron Hands Slayer, being our number 4 entry, Iron Crown, which really reinvented how a lot of Pokemon have to play in this format. With the rise of an actually really threatening Pokemon with Expanding Force, this brought Size Spam teams to a whole nother level, and I think they can finally actually have a strong performance in future top cuts. With Iron Crown, you have a Pokemon that not only benefits from Trick Room, but you also have a Pokemon that can reliably benefit from the speed boost, since you can creep options like Scarf or Shifu that would otherwise potentially be able to revenge you. Iron Crown can definitely do this way better than Armarouge, which has to bank off of weak armor sets, which is a lot more of an inconsistent way, to say the least, to boost your Armarouge speed. And also considering the fact that your typing of Steel and Psychic is a much better defensive typing, it's no wonder to see why this proves to be such a terrifying option. Even with all the dark types in the format, it's still really easily to counter them with options like Terra Water and Terra Fighting to get around the dark types, and I fully expect that Iron Crown will be used a lot going forward, though there's still plenty of counterplay with Pokemon like Ice Spinner, Chiampao, and Rillaboom existing, to where Iron Crown does benefit a lot right now, but it's not exactly a top 3 Pokemon. I think if I was to get hate for any entry on this list, it's probably the fact that I ranked this Pokemon over Iron Crown, however, being our number 3 entry, Gouging Fire. Now, Gouging Fire, I will admit, I did think was more of a fad at first, but it's consistently proven to only go up every time we have another regional. With the terrifying typing of Fire and Dragon, you have a Fire type that's completely neutral to Scald and other really prolific Water type moves, as well as the fact that you have a Dragon type that can pressure a lot of common steals with its Dual Stab. Also, this is the first past Paradox Pokemon that gets the Stab boost from the Sun, making it an incredible physical wall breaker for Sun teams. You're typically going to see a moveset of Breaking Swipe, Burning Bulwark, Dragon Dance, and Heat Crash, though occasionally you'll see options like Howl over Dragon Dance in order to boost an ally's attack stat as well. For items, it's always going to be Boost Energy or Clear Amulet, and any other item in my opinion is an objective waste of an item slot in Gouging Fire, as Clear Amulet can help get around a lot of the Intimidate options. Meanwhile, Booster Energy is great to boost either your attack set to wall break more easily without the Sun reliance, or Booster Speed to get a really fast Howl off for a really fast Pokemon like Chiampao, for example. Very few Pokemon want to take a Photosynthesis boosted hit, or even a Dragon Dance boosted hit for that matter, and with really strong Heat Crashes that are also Sun boosted and Stab boosted, it's really hard to actually check this thing. Despite the fact that one of the Pokemon that's not really used a lot right now, being Heatran, could completely wall out this moveset, for example, Gouging Fire does still get ground moves like Stomping Tantrum to combat this, and it would at least force a lot of Terra 50/50s. And overall, I definitely think Gouging Fire will only continue to go up in usage. We have finally got a new meta-defining past Paradox Pokemon in VGC though, that's not just Fluttermane. And going into our number 2 spot, we have none other than Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt, in my opinion, is currently the most influential Pokemon in VGC. That's not to say it's the best, but it definitely has a really strong stranglehold over the format, as the Pokemon that essentially made Urshifu Rapid and Tornadus now a significantly less prolific core. Taking down such titans as Urshifu Rapid and Torn Eye is a really difficult feat to do. But Urshifu Rapid is now completely checked by Thunderclap from Raging Bolt, a strong priority special Sucker Punch, as well as the fact that Tornadus can't really do anything to Raging Bolt to actually punish it. With options like Photosynthesis special attack, boosted Draco Meteors, you can also get around a lot of Dragon types that would maybe wall your electric attacks, and still get a neutral option in most ground type Pokemon and grass types that would otherwise also completely check electrics. I think this has probably the highest ceiling of any Pokemon in Regulation F in my opinion, and I think a really good player can take advantage of this to all new heights that we haven't seen yet, but ultimately I think it's a lot less of a consistent Pokemon in comparison to our number 1 pick, so I definitely couldn't rank it at number 1 unfortunately just yet. But I am curious to see where Raging Bolt does go going forward. Now, frankly, I've mentioned this with a lot of other entries. I've tried to limit how often I do to hopefully make you guys forget, but our number 1 Pokemon in today's list is going to be Fluttermane, which honestly really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, despite the fact that I've already mentioned it. It's still, objectively speaking, the best Paradox Pokemon in my opinion. With a monstrous 135 special attack and a 135 speed stat, you have to be a Pokemon that can really carefully either just outpace Fluttermane, which is very difficult to do, or a Pokemon that can just take hits from Fairy and Ghost, which is a very annoying dual stab combination to take. Not only this, but with Terra Fairy and this Photosynthesis special attack boost, you can even outdamage Geomancy Xerneas, which is a feat that is incredible to do for a special attacker. I can't fathom how Game Freak decided that a Pokemon that could do this would be able to be even remotely balanced, as Fairy is already one of the best types in the game, and making a Fairy type that is a not restricted Pokemon that can outdamage Xerneas of all things, while still having a means of outpacing Xerneas if you didn't want to lean to damage as much, and it truly baffles my mind. However, I think what baffles my mind even more is how easy it is to actually check Flutter Mane. And it's not even a case of just broken checking broken with Flutter Mane. There's a lot of ways to actually revenge this Pokemon off in the format. I think Flutter Mane is objectively one of the most versatile Pokemon in the format, with options like Booster Energy being incredible for boosting not only your special attack, but also your speed stat. This thing has incredible Terra typings, as while you do typically see Fairy, options like Grass and Water have seen a lot of usage. Steel is also a great way around opposing Flutter Mane. You'll see Terra Ghost now and then to just boost your Ghost Stab instead of your Fairy Stab, as it's a really good way into a lot of common Flutter Mane checks without having to go for more coverage options. And even options like Terra Fire have seen usage. Like, it's a really versatile Terra pick. And that's not even getting into common coverage options that you'll see on Flutter Mane, as well you'll see a lot of Shadow Ball, Gleam, and Moonblast. Typically, Flutter Mane's fourth move is left up to whatever the team needs. And this can be a move like Misty Terrain to clear terrain for options like Safety Terrain and Electric Terrain teams, or even just for Grassy Glide Rillaboom. You have Parasong, which can be a really good option in endgame scenarios, Icy Winch for speed control, Gouging Fire, and Ogerpon also really hate the Power Gem option. Thunderbolt is great for a lot of flying types, and there's so many other options that are more niche. Flutter Mane is easily the most adaptable Pokemon in any team, and it's one of the very few Pokemon that I think you genuinely have no drawback building around right now. And you can kind of just slap this into any team right now, and you don't even need to justify it, in my opinion. If you guys enjoyed today's list, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and comment your own rankings down below, as I'd love to see how your guys' lists differ from my own. Also, while you're on your way down there, make sure to check out Kurt, who I'm going to be linking in the description below, as he did an incredible job as always editing today's video. And Kurt also makes a lot of incredible content, especially in the Draft League side, where he's currently uploading for the WBG of VGC style Draft League, and he has been doing incredible content as well as incredible at battling in this league. As always, I appreciate you guys' support on the video, and I'll see you guys in next week's upload. Peace out, guys.